I think about a dozen rose bushes right out by the front door. Well, you got the little short bushy ones, the floribundas, and then you've got the multifloras or whatever they are that are a little higher. Then you got the standards, which will rise, and you go out to Washington and they've got 5 varieties of wild roses out there, and they're just gorgeous. But they hate the heat. I tried to get them to grow here. They weren't having it. Okay. I reckon it's time for us to start and Lord willing finish Nehemiah. So let's go to our Father in prayer. Almighty and everlasting and all powerful, all wise. We thank you so much for your plan of creation, for being a part of that plan. We thank you so much for your gospel. We thank you so much for your son and the sacrifice that he made. We thank you for the opportunity that we have to study your word and apply it to our lives and to learn about your relationship with us. We ask Heavenly Father that this study that we conduct today be scripturally sound and pleasing in your sight, that it enable us to represent you better to the world outside and to bring more people to the knowledge of the quality, not only the quality of life that we can enjoy here, but the wonderful eternity that we can spend with you. And we ask Heavenly Father that you strengthen us in our will and in our ability to take this word out to the world, which so desperately needs it. We ask Heavenly Father as we conduct this study that you be with those who have traveled to be a part of the memorial service for Mary Colson. We are so we will miss her, but we are so happy that she is now joyfully in your presence, and we ask Heavenly Father that you protect those of her family who are traveling and who have been here and are traveling home, and that you keep us all in your word. We ask that you be with those who are also in our congregation and in our family struggling with health issues, and there are so many. And of course, our thoughts go to EJ as he continues to struggle with his back issues and his cramps. And we ask that you be with him and be with Judy as she continues to take care of him, and be with Karen as she continues her therapy. Be with Jerry as he faces the upcoming surgery for his ankle, and we thank you for the skills that you place in the hands of the medical personnel that are involved in keeping us healthy. But we also thank you so much for your providential care and the healing wonders of this body with which we have been blessed. And we know there are the relationship and the intimate relationship that you have with the workings of nature can provide us with far more healing as long as we trust in you, and we continue to ask for that. And we know that you answer prayers in your own way, and we accept your will in those things. And we ask that you once more be with us and protect us, be with those who are online. If they are online for health reasons, that you heal them, that they can come back in. If they are online for travel, that you keep them safe. And if they are online for any other reason, that you ensure, Father, that there are those who are placed in their lives who will bring them to a place where they can actually share the congregation and the encouragement and the exhortation of brothers and sisters of like precious faith. We ask all these things in your Son's name. Amen. So Nehemiah 13. We just covered, and I'll just kind of broad brushstroke it. We just looked over the villages. We looked at all the villages and got a sort of a geography lesson, as haphazard as it was, in the cities that were around, and got a few maps that were representative of that. And then we looked at the priests and the Levites, and then we looked at the procession and the dedication of the city walls, the final acceptation of the will of God, and the final affirmation of the city celebration, if you will, a Founders Day celebration. But then we note that, and we will note here in 13, and we'll kind of tie a few things together from all the way back in Nehemiah 2, Nehemiah 4, Nehemiah 5, as we look at some points that we raised there, and we'll remind you that that Nehemiah, remember, was the cupbearer, the king's cupbearer, and of course, whenever he left to come to, and when the king granted him the leave to come to Jerusalem to deal with some negative reports that he had heard, the king also asked him to return. Remember, and so he spent 12 years putting things in order, and then he left to go back to the king of Persia and give him that report and spend that time and work in the king's court, and then return. Okay, and we're going to address that time frame. And it couldn't have been a tremendously long amount of time. It's rather indefinite as to when that was. But having noted that they came back from exile for walking away from God's law, okay, that after they were returned, no sooner did they return than there were those who started these things again, and it had a lot to do with mixing with the population, and we're going to see this addressed as well, okay? And because Nehemiah no sooner left and came back than he found that things had deteriorated so terribly and so quickly, and these reforms that he had to institute, which he should never have had to institute if the priests and the Levites had been doing their job in the first place, instead of going into collusion with the local population, the local crooked politicians, as it were. So my plan was originally to go to from Nehemiah to Esther. I'm gonna put Esther off just a little bit, because in light of what we see happening here, and yes, don't be offended by that. Nothing personal, but we will look instead at Malachi, who addresses what has happened to the state of Judaism in Judea in that short period of time following the return from exile. Okay, but now we're going to wrap up. We're going to wrap up with Nehemiah's reforms. And do I have someone who is set up to? Pat's going to read for us, and so let me grab my gizmo here. I love gizmo. That's a great word. It applies to just about everything. So, I used to have a senior chief, who say, "You need to go to the engineer, the chief engineer, and tell him that we need to get these supplies." And I said, "Okay, it's on my list. I'll get around to it." And he said, "Wait a minute." He pulls out a big old washer and he says, "I'll give you my round to it." So that was probably his way of saying, this is something that can't wait. But anyway, we're starting with Nehemiah. Read the first two verses of Nehemiah 13, please, Pat.
On that day, they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Amorite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever, because they not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them. Howbeit, our God turned their curse into a blessing.
Okay, so now what we're doing is we're kind of hearkening back to an old the Old Testament back to Deuteronomy, to that law that was. So we see that Moses said an Ammonite, or I should say God through Moses, and I want to point that out, that an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. That's emphasis. When he says to the 10th generation, he means never. Never. That's a figure of speech. 10 is a perfect number. That means never will they be a part of the congregation of the Lord. That's God's judgment against them, because they couldn't even be, what do they call them? Acolytes? Converts. They couldn't even be converted to Judaism. Okay? They would not be allowed, because they met you not with bread and with water in the way. Remember that they asked them for that, and they said, no, you shall not pass. Okay? And because they hired against thee Balaam the son of Beor of Pethor, and remember Balaam's donkey, to curse thee, nevertheless the Lord thy God would not hearken unto Balaam, but the Lord thy God turned the curse into a blessing. Balaam tried to curse him, and he couldn't. All he could do was utter blessings, because the Lord thy God loved thee. Thou shalt not prosperity all thy days forever. Do collude with these people. That's what he's saying. Okay? That's a harsh judgment. But again, it's God's call. It's not theirs. And they had no call to do some of the things which we're going to see as we get into this, these passages. All right. So we see that we have they've started to separate all the mixed multitude. They're starting to push them outside of the city walls. They're going through and they're purging their ranks from the temple. All right? Keep going, please. Read verses 4 and 5.
What about 3?
What's that?
3.
3. I'm sorry. Yes, 3. 3, 4, and 5.
Now it came to pass, when they had heard the law, that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude. And before this, Eliashib the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of God, was allied to Tobiah. And he had prepared for him a great chamber, where aforetime they laid meat offerings, the frankincense, the vessels, and the tithes of the corn, the new wine, and the oil, which was commanded to be given to the Levites, and the singers, and the porters, and the offerings of the priests.
Takes us back a bit. Remember that we go back to 12:4. It says that the portions of the singers and the portions every day is portion, and they sanctified the holy things. Levites sanctified them unto the children. Remember that's one of the things that they had been charged with doing, was to put all that together. Well, because the singers and the Nethinims and all those who are providing, as we look at this, their portion has been diverted purpose, diverted to the use of Tobiah. Tobiah is a Moabite, I think, or a Horonite, I guess it is. But anyway, he is not Jewish, and he's to this chamber, this treasury, this chamber where all these are being taken care of. Tobiah has allied himself with Eliashib. That Eliashib's son is married to one of Tobiah's daughters. So and Eliashib is a priest, and his son is a priest. So there's a priest who is married to a heathen. Okay? Forbidden. And there's a good reason for it. All right. So we see that as we get here, we go back to Nehemiah 2, and we see that Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, Tobiah was an Ammonite, heard of it and grieved them exceedingly. Why? Well, because this is an apple cart issue. This is a rice bowl issue. He's in collusion, and so they're trying to harass them, keep them from doing it. And so you look at Nehemiah 4, and then we see that where once more Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites, the Ashdodites that heard the walls of Jerusalem were made up. So they fought them at every corner. They fought them when they built the walls, and the breaches began to be stopped. Very wroth, very upset. Remember, wroth, that word wroth is actually taken from the snorting of a bull with his head down and his horns pointed at you like he's going to charge. Okay? And conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. So there again, they've acted. And yet, despite this, we see that Eliashib has Tobiah into the house and has prepared for him a great chamber. And before times that had been where the singers and the Levites had stored their goods. And so now he has access to it, and their goods, which are supposed to be church, are now being plundered by inside the walls of the temple. That is blasphemy. That is sacrilege according to God's law and according to Levitical law. Okay? So now we get to the point where we see that Nehemiah has returned and found this. Continue on, please, through verse 9. Through verse.
And I came to Jerusalem and understood that Eliashib did for the Tobiah in preparing a chamber in the courts of the house of God, and it grieved me sore. Therefore I cast forth the stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber.
Okay, now I think did I skip something? Did we do verse 5? Where he had prepared for him a great chamber? Yes, we did that. And then verse 6 says, and all this time was not I at Jerusalem, for in the 2 and 13th year of Artaxerxes, that's the 2 and 30th year, that's the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, came I unto the king, and after certain days obtained I leave. So we see that he got there on the 20th year of Artaxerxes, and he left again on the 32nd year. So he was there for 12 years. Then he went back to Babylon to the king Artaxerxes, okay, and stayed there for a while, and then came back to Jerusalem and found out what Eliashib had done, okay. And so I have that. There we go. And I'll point out here, as I mentioned, I'll take you back to Nehemiah 2, verse 6. Whenever I told you before that the king sent him, but he set a time. In other words, he said, I'll be gone for 12 years and I'll be back. Okay? And he went back in a promise to the king and reported back to the king. And while while the cat's away, the mice will play. And so here's Eliashib, who is already starting to pervert the priesthood and pervert the temple. Man who was supposed to be in charge of it all. There's the Fox Garden Inn house. Okay, so then he says, I came to Jerusalem and understood what he did for Tobiah on Tobiah's behalf, and preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. That is sacrilege. Okay. And if you go back to verse 13:1, he talks about the fact that God said the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever. It grieved me sore. That's where we got to, right? So once again, we see that it is obviously a violation of God's law to have a non-Jew in the temple. All right? That's what got them exiled in the first place. Okay? Keep going, Pat.
Then I commanded, and they cleansed the chambers, and thither brought I again the vessels of the house of God with the meat offering and the frankincense.
Okay, so now I want to point out that word cleansed does not mean that you sweep it out and that you scrub the walls. That cleansed means there is a ceremonial. That's what the meat offering is, a ceremonial cleansing, asking for forgiveness for profaning the temple. And that is a spiritual cleansing. It's kind of more like the lines of an exorcism, if you will, a spiritual cleansing of that temple to get rid of the influence, the spiritual influence of a heathen inside the temple. Okay, so that was a spiritual, symbolic thing, not just a physical sweeping out and cleaning. Because remember that he had forcibly, it grieved me sore, therefore I cast out all the household stuff of Tobiah. He forcibly evicted Tobiah like an angry wife throwing her husband's stuff out on the front lawn. Okay? All right. So keep going.
And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled, every one to his field.
You see how bad that is? They have refused to allow the Levites and the Nethinims and the singers to do their job. They have not fed them, so they have no choice. Remember that earlier he had called them in. They had drawn lots and called them in to who was going to come back into Jerusalem and provide support. And they literally took their families and they moved them in. Their families were starving. They had to go back out to their lands and live on their lands and farm so they could feed themselves, because the violation of God's law did not permit them. They were not permitted to eat as they were to be provided for in accordance with God's law by the very priests who were charged with that. So there's going to be a lot of hurting going on here as he fires people. Okay, all right, keep going.
Then I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place.
I love that. You know how my grandma used to say, if you keep on doing that, I'm going to put you in your place. There it is. That's what he did. He called them up, he gave, and he fired a bunch of them. Keep going.
Then brought all Judah the tithe of the corn and the new wine and the oil into the treasuries. And I made the treasurers over the treasuries Shelemiah the priest and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan the son of Zachar, Manatan, for they were counted faithful, and their office was to distribute to the brethren.
So the people who would not do the job were fired, and he got people that he could trust when he came back. Okay, so I don't know what happened to Ezra, but remember that Ezra was not the chief priest. Ezra never was the chief priest. All right, so we see that he's taken a lot of these people and he's gotten rid of them, and he's appointed the people that he could trust. And then as he does this, as he's making account of this, and remember that this material is written here as an administrative report to the Babylonian king. A lot of this is recorded in the language of Babylon, and the official language, the Aramaic language, the official language of the land. Remember that as the Greeks, one of the things that we had, one of the reasons that we have the Bible is because the Greeks established Koine Greek as the language of the realm whenever they took over. Well, the Greeks aren't on the scene yet. That's yet to be seen. But there's still an official administrative language which has been adopted, and has not changed. Even as the language, even as it's gone through Babylon and gone into Persian hands, they've kept that Aramaic language as a legal language. And so a lot of this is in Aramaic, recorded in Aramaic, and this is being acted on as an administrative report back to the king of Babylon as this material is recorded. And then he lays in there, remember that the Persian king had sent them there to pray for them on their behalf. And so he puts in there, reminding the king that God is in control. He puts in there an interjected prayer. Okay, and that prayer is verse 14. And go ahead and read, if you will, please. Yeah, go ahead and read verse 14.
Remember me, O God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done thereof.
Now, in addition to what has happened in the temple, okay, You're seeing violations of Mosaic law taking place, especially with regard to the Sabbaths and the intermarriage. And these are reforms that Nehemiah has to institute. He's got to get them back on track. All right, keep going.
In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in the sheaves, and lading asses, as so wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens to Jerusalem on the Sabbath
On the
day.
Sabbath day. Keep going.
And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. The dwelt of Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem.
Okay, so men of Tyre, so they came from the coast with the fish, with fish and goods that were traded. Remember, Tyre and Sidon were trading ports, and so they bring all these goods, and they bring the fish, and they bring them in, and they'd sell them in the bazaar on the Sabbath. Okay, then the shambles, as they called it. We called it that. I guess the Arabians would call it a bazaar, but they would call it a shambles, flea market. Okay, all right. So the dwelt men of Tyre, and so here what we're seeing is all these things, and the key is the things that are going on the Sabbath. Okay, continue on.
Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and I said unto them, what evil thing is this that you do, and profane the Sabbath day?
And now he's going to go back and say, this is why you were in Babylon in the first place. Okay, keep going.
Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath.
You risk that. Again, he says that you're playing with fire here, and you should know better. All right, keep going.
And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark, I commanded the gates should be shut and charged, open till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there be no burden brought in on the Sabbath day.
Okay, now remember that you go back to Jeremiah, and you see that Jeremiah reminded them of what Joshua reminded them of as well, where thus saith the Lord, take heed to yourselves, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. Remember, they could walk. They could walk. They have a Sabbath day, and they could return back. Okay, and they couldn't carry anything. But they did remember that that Jesus. There's an exception for that. You know, you can retrieve lost animals and do things like that on the Sabbath day, but only as much as it takes to solve that problem. Neither carry forth a burden out of your house any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day as I commanded your father. And he says they were stiff-necked, and that's why they would be punished. That's Jeremiah as a prophet of the Lord. Okay, and then and so it's interesting to note as we get here, verse 20. Verse 20 is kind of funny, tongue in cheek maybe going on here. All right, go ahead.
So the merchants and the sellers of all kinds were lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them and said unto them, why lie ye about the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From the time forth they came no more on the Sabbath. Levites, that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should come and keep the gates to sanctify the Sabbath. Remember me, O God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy.
And when he says spare me, he means spare us according to the greatness of thy mercy. This is a prayer that he's making on behalf not just of himself, but also on behalf of the people who have done this. He's saying, forgive them. Please accept that we have corrected it. And so it's funny that he says, so the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Okay, they tried it a couple of times. Okay, but then he came out and he said, if you show up again, I'm gonna have you forcibly evicted. I'm gonna lay hands on you, and that's a threat. Okay, so he threatened them and said, don't hang around outside. You're not going to get in, and your very presence is a vexation to us. So leave, come back on the, okay, but don't show up now. All right, and so he's sanctified. He sanctifies these men, these Levites. They've cleansed themselves. They've dedicated themselves. Pledge not to let anybody come in the gates and protect them. In other words, on the Sabbath day, the whole city is sacred. Okay, that's an interesting concept, and maybe we want to explore that a little bit later on. And so, so we get to another problem: intermarriage. Keep going, verse 23.
In those days also saw I Jews that had married wives of Ashdod and Ammon and Moab, spoke half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak language, but according to the language of each people.
Now it's interesting that they say they spake half in the speech of Ashdod. That's not what that means. That they spoke a pidgin Hebrew, where half of it was the language was Ashdod. What he means is half of those kids didn't even know how to. They had not been trained. In other words, they were children of mixed marriages, and by that I mean mixed nationality marriages, and they were learn their language. I mean, it used to be you could go to Miami. It's not like that anymore, but it used to be you could go and there would be whole areas where that business went on just like normal. But if you didn't speak Spanish, you couldn't. Next generations of children have learned English. Okay, so there's this, and that was a cultural thing. That was a cultural purity thing for them. They wanted to maintain their Spanish culture. Well, that's a matter of nationality. This is a matter of religion. Okay, and so that setting aside that is supposed to happen has been thwarted here by this action, and he's very upset. Okay, he can in verse 25. He's that's what he's doing. He's challenging these men. He's saying, "Don't mess with me." He's bullying them. He's plucking the hair on their faces to get their attention, and saying, "This is serious, and don't mess with me." Keep going.
And I contended with them, and cursed them, and smote certain of them, and plucked off the hair, and made them swear by God, saying, You shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor their daughters unto your sons, or for yourselves.
And now he's going to bring them another example. Remember Solomon. As much as God loves Solomon, Solomon's actions caused a civil war. Keep going.
Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him. Nevertheless, even him did outlandish.
So David and Solomon, remember, let their wives build temples adjacent to the Temple Mount to other gods. And it got worse and worse as a result of that, to the point where they were sacrificing their newborn children inside the city. That's why God removed them from the land. That was the last straw, the straw that broke the camel's back. And God said, it's time for y'all to go. All right. So the question, this is a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question in verse 27. I'll read that. Shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to transgress against our God and marrying strange wives? Heaven forbid. Okay? All right. Keep going.
And one of the sons of Doiah, the son of Elishib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat the Hornite. Therefore I chased him from me.
He ran him off because he was married to the daughter the son of the high priest, the grandson of the high priest, was married to, and therefore of the Aaronic line, was married to the daughter of Sanballat the Horonite, a heathen. Okay? His name was Manasseh, a name that we've heard before. Remember, for executing Isaiah in a very heinous fashion. Okay? But this Manasseh, when he left, founded a sect in Samaria which only acknowledged, remember that there's prophets and there's wisdom, but he said that's not going to happen. I'm gonna be a Jewish, but I'm only going to go to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's only going to be the Torah that we acknowledge. And so that sect in Samaria acknowledged the Torah, but did not acknowledge any of the prophets or the wisdom, Psalms and Proverbs, okay, and did not acknowledge the work of the prophets, which is interesting when you consider that they throw that kind of a rock, but they did not acknowledge Christ as the Son of God either, okay? And because they did not acknowledge the prophets who predicted the coming of the Christ, it's not a surprise that they would miss the coming of the Christ in the first place. Okay? All right, so continue on.
Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Thus cleansed I them from all strangers and appointed the wards over the priests and the Levites, every one to his business, and for the wood offering at times appointed, and for the first fruit. Remember me, O my God, for good.
There's that final prayer to have mercy on me and have mercy on these people, because we've worked to fix this thing. And so it's a nice little summary. Verse 30: cleansed them from their strangers, appointed the wards of the priests and Levites, and put everyone back to the proper business of honoring and worshiping God to the best of his ability. It did not last for long, unfortunately, and we will, as we do our introduction to Malachi starting next week, we'll start to look at what Malachi has to say about how bad things got, because they love, and we all do. But with God, there is no corner cutting. Yes, ma'am. No, you missed that part. I'm gonna put Esther back behind Malachi, because study, it occurred to me that this departure from God's law continues on, and I want to make sure that we understand that even the best of intentions can be, the best laid plans of mice and men gang after glay, as has been. Yes, ma'am.
So is the Mormon Church temple in Utah, is it fashioned after the same rules as, because don't they?
In theory, but no. Okay. To start with, God never said you can have multiple wives. Okay, so that was a perversion of the law. It may be fashioned after the temple, and the reason for that is because they fashioned themselves as a lost tribe. All right, but don't throw rocks just at them either, because remember that we had that concept of manifest destiny. Okay, so we considered ourselves, this land was considered to be New Canaan, and that we had the ability, because the Jews, God told the Jews to cast all of them out. That was the idea that was behind the isolation and dare I say, near extermination of the Native Americans. Okay, that we had the right to put them off their land, that we had the right to exterminate them. The reason the buffalo were killed was to deprive them of their food source. And because when they traveled and migrated with the buffalo, they traveled across other lands. By killing the buffalo, they were able to isolate the tribes and stop their migration. All right. So it was all a calculated effort, because they felt that it was their manifest destiny to do so. Okay, and that was a misinterpretation of God's law. And it is a misinterpretation of God's law to consider yourself to be a lost tribe, because to start with, nobody can prove they're Jewish. They can prove that they have Jewish blood in them, but they can't prove what tribe they're in anymore. Those records were gone. They've been fabricated to a large extent at this point.
But don't they don't allow anyone in the temple that isn't Mormon.
That isn't Mormon. That's true. Yes. And so but that's Old Testament law. But remember, Old Testament law was nailed to the cross. And so when they do that, they crucify Christ anew. It's kind of funny that it's like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, because you can't say, well, you can't speak about Christ as the Messiah and then speak about Jewish law as being valid and binding. Okay, but don't throw rocks at them, just at them. The Catholic Church does the same thing. Okay, all right. Did I see a hand go up? Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say on the Mormon thing, they built this huge temple in San Diego
Mm-hmm.
that they later now they do tours.
Yeah.
So go figure. They may not still be doing it, but I know that 15 years ago they did.
Yeah. Yep. And yes, ma'am.
They have various temples across the country.
Yeah.
And before they start doing temple work in them, they open them up for people to walk through and see.
Yeah. And then when they closed
And
it,
then when they close, it's just for members with the temple recommend from their bishop.
right. And so they have that hierarchy that's established. Yeah. That's a very interesting Mormon study of the Mormon Church is a very interesting study. I one of these days I plan on doing a little more research into it myself. But we actually have we have a good friend of ours who is a preacher who was converted from Mormonism, and he's very poorly thought of in the Mormon Church. They call him a blasphemer, heretic. He's been branded a heretic, and so his family does not associate with him, his Mormon family. That's a tough choice to make, but he did. So, any other questions? I've kept you a little longer than I perhaps would have, but we still have 15 minutes. So we'll be back at the top of the hour for our service. And thank you for your participation. Be back at the top of the hour.